now time to go for our first mixing pass. So our first order of business is to link everything that isn't linked already to the mixer. And then we'll start throwing on side chains, reverb, and other such effects. So first, we're pretty much just looking for anything that doesn't have a number off to the side. And that tells us, okay, these aren't linked, so we'll go ahead. And actually, I'm going to select these two claps, link them to the same channel, or I guess technically they'd be called busing to the same channel because they're two signals going to one single bus. So we do that. I'm going to go ahead, and even though it's hi-hat's already linked to 3, I'm going to go ahead and link it again. That way I can just get the visual sense of, okay, these hats are linked here. I'll quickly save the project. I'll go ahead and link the kick to channel 1. Again, for the same visual thing. Link. I think we're using the snare, so actually we can go ahead and delete this. Probably bring in a different snare. Bring in the keys. Link that. I think all 3 of these guys, if I remember right. I think these are all of our chords and stuff. Yes, we'll go ahead and link these 3 guys. Just rename this chord so we have a visual. Break chords. That way we know that they are part of the break and not part of the drop. And actually, we'll just rename this. We'll color these green for the visual sense. It's always good to color code. When we come back in the project, you're not spending too much time going, okay, where's everything linked? As I practice more than I should practice more than I preach. I think this is another lead. I'll go to pattern 2. Yeah, all 3 of these are leads. So we'll link, actually I think number 7's already linked to that, so we won't mess with that. So we'll just go ahead and link these 2 leads. Color it bluish. Recolor these to the same so we know they're both going to that channel. And then we're going to make a auxiliary bus for both of these leads. So we can just process the main lead, all the leads in the same channel. So lead, bus, and we'll color it kind of purple. And we'll right click, route to this track only, route to this track only. And now all of our sounds, all these leads, are all being routed in here, so now we can process these all the same. So we have everything set up. I think the bass. And now for the rest of you who are freaking out that you didn't see the bass drop in the air, you're like, oh, Colin, what the hell happened to all this? Done screwed up on that. For some reason, I forgot to save the original FLP with the bass and the air part, but I've reintroduced them again. I literally didn't do anything else that we didn't do in the bass introduction tutorial. Yeah, so I just reintroduced them, linked them up, didn't throw any other extra processing. So now we have all of our elements linked, have all of our air, and now when we play kind of the basic drop, we have this. Now we can go about sidechaining things, putting reverb on them, what have you. Actually, the first order of business we're going to do, though, in our first mixing pass, is just do some basic gain staging. That is, using these volume knobs to set each level's gain or volume relative to one another. That way, that's really at least what gets 80-90% of a beefy mix, is that if you want a louder kick, just turn all the other elements down and make sure the kick's louder volume-wise. You can throw a little bit of plugins, do some compression, but at the end of the day, the thing that gets you 80-90% of the results is the gain staging, just adjusting the volume. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we're going to start off mixing everything around the kick. That's popping up around 7 dB. So now we'll put everything around that. The claps, we'll put about 13 because they're pretty sharp and they don't need to be super loud. Hi-hats we can put really low, especially when we hit the limiter, those will really start popping up. Now the lead. Turn that down, release the aux. Select the bass. Put it under the kick a little bit. Now take the air and turn this a bit more down. At least white noise, you don't need a whole lot of it, you just need a little bit, and it'll fill up the top end, no problem. Take a little bit more top end out of that bass. Okay, so this is sounding pretty good so far. We're going to go ahead and do some good old sidechaining. For those of you who aren't familiar with sidechaining, the quick overview of it is that when you sidechain an element, you're taking a given element and linking it to another element, and then when that other element hits, the element that's being sidechained to ducks out. This all become apparent very quickly, as I'm sure if you're anything like myself, words don't really do justice in explaining it, so we're going to go ahead and we'll first sidechain the leads, at least the lead auxiliary, to the kick. So we'll select, make sure our kick channel selected, we right click, sidechain to this track, go into lead, open a fruity limiter, go to compressor, turn the sidechain up to number 1. Actually, so we'll move these and look for our kick pattern to be ducking in. Turn the ratio up. Okay, so that's when the lead's coming in. There we go. There's our kick. So now you're noticing that kind of pumpy feel. That's sidechaining in a nutshell. Although, taking another look at this, looks like it's sidechaining a little bit too much. So our kick tail is a little bit too long, so we'll go ahead and shorten the kick tail. So we have a choppier sidechain. Go ahead and turn the leads down a bit. And that's sidechaining in a nutshell. So we'll go ahead and do this to the bass in the air, because we want pretty much everything, at least all the main instruments, to be pumping. Hi-hats, they don't sound, percussion doesn't usually sound really good sidechain. I mean, you could definitely start a new trend. All power to you. In my experience doing it, it's only very rare that I sidechain any sort of percussion. Do a harder sidechain, that is, turn the threshold down a bit more on the bass than the lead, as the bass and the kick, at least in the lower frequencies, will be conflicting a lot more than let's say the lead. So I'm going to hit the sidechain harder for the bass drop. Actually, I should put a caveat to that, because I know this is something a lot of producers say, and it's somewhat true, but I know it was definitely somewhat confusing for a long time, because even though people are saying, oh yeah, the kick and the bass, they share the same frequencies, the kick and the lead actually also share the same frequencies. So I'm sure for some of you producers are like, okay, why do people say that? It's kind of a non sequitur, because the bass seems like it has the same amount of high frequencies. And I'll just go ahead and open up really quick. I mean, the bass still got high frequencies up here. If you look at the lead, just open a EQ on it. It's still got high frequencies over there, so why aren't we sidechaining the lead as hard as the bass? And the reason for that, actually open the bass, parametric EQ, so I just have a visual thing to show you, is that the higher you go up in terms of the frequency spectrum, the more elements can fit together, or at least that can take up the same spectrum without clashing too much. So if you're going to like the super low end, really you can only really fit, like in the 60 hertz range, you can only really fit maybe a kick or a bass. You can't have them both playing at the same time, or it's gonna sound really muddy. But if you go to like the highest frequencies, if you listen closely, you'll notice that, okay, the claps has frequencies up there, the air has frequencies up there, the bass has a little bit of frequencies up there, the kick has frequencies up there. So why aren't we sidechaining the shit out of everything up there? It's just because from my experience, higher frequencies of elements, they don't tend, even though they're overlapping, they tend to get away with overlapping a lot more than their lower frequencies. At least they sound better that way. Obviously, I just put another touch a little bit quickly on that. Sometimes I do notice for my higher frequencies, I'll do a little bit of like a dB to a ducking, just so that maybe like the air, for instance, will stand out a little bit more than the lead, which stands out a little bit more than, let's say, the clap, for instance. I might do a little bit of ducking with the EQ. But when it comes to the lower frequencies, again, because there's only, in my experience and kind of common best mixing practice, you can only really have one element, possibly two, in extreme low frequencies. At least if you want a traditionally good sounding mix. Again, you can go all avant-garde, have like 6 elements playing in the low end at the same time. All power to you. Just gonna have a really interesting mixing approach in terms of making sure each element is heard distinctively in a given frequency range. So with that little side tangent out of the way, let's go ahead and finish sidechaining everything. So we have the bass sidechain, and the sidechain of the air. Go to limiter, sidechain 1. Those higher frequencies up a little bit more. Alright, so we have some sidechaining done. Element mix-wise is sounding pretty good. Let's go ahead and throw some reverb on all these suckers. So one approach that you could do is you could go into each of these and open a slot, go into reverb, select your 3D reverb, and turn the wet knob and just the wet and dry knob all the way up, and push your CPU a little bit harder, which is one approach. But the more, actually, not only is it better for your CPU, and a lot easier to do, it's actually better mixing practice, is if you go to these 4 right inserts over here. These are considered sends, and a send is a channel in which a given, at least is a, as you can see it as a bus channel in which one element, or at least it's already assigned to a channel, sends its signal to that send, but doesn't send it exclusively to that given send. So a bus, let's say, because as some of you remember, actually in this video, we linked these two to a lead bus. Bus means any elements that are being linked to it are being linked to it exclusively, so you don't see the leads here being linked to the send. But now, if you go to this bus here, you notice this lead bus here is being linked exclusively to the send over here. So that's one little, I guess, differentiator. When you hear those two terms thrown out a lot, you're like, okay, what's the difference between a send and a bus? And God, why do they all have all these fancy terms? At least for now you know the difference between a send and a bus. So we're to create a send for a reverb, because that way, turn the dry down, turn the wet up, because we already have the dry signals going into the master bus as it is. So all we want this send to do is just, we can send a little bit of the signal to this reverb send, and then we can adjust the amount knob down here. And now we can tell, okay, we want this element to have a little bit of this reverb sound. We want this element to maybe have a lot more of it. Oh, actually, that one's to a bus, and we don't really want to do that. We want maybe the bass for a reason to have a lot more. That way, we can adjust each of these, the kind of amount of reverb knobs by selecting a given channel, adjusting the knob here, without having to individually add in each reverb. So we'll go ahead and do that. Lead, I think we'll add a lot more, because leads tend to sound pretty good. Flooded with reverb, especially for making future bass, but that's another tutorial. And bass drop, maybe a little bit of reverb, not a whole lot. Air, a little bit. And next, I'm going to go ahead and high cut the low end, because from my experience, I like the sound of the reverb, or at least the reverb doesn't, when you have, at least the bass will sound a lot cleaner if you have just a kick and the bass playing in those extreme low frequencies. I mean, you can go full on dead mouse if you really know what you're doing maybe short reverbs. You can go ahead and take your chances by just don't even worry about this high pass. But for our case, we're going to have a pretty big reverb, make it sound pretty wide and open. So we don't want those lower frequencies ringing out, or else it's just going to make the low end sound really muddy. So we're going to go ahead and high pass it around 200 hertz. Do that. Set the reverb preset to, the cathedral is always good because it's a very big one. Dry, wet knob up. Now, if we start messing around with the reverb amounts, actually, we'll go ahead and rename this reverb so we know for future reference, we should start getting a roomier sound. Sound like a good level for the leads, bass. Sound like a good amount for the bass. Go ahead and turn this bass down a little bit. Turn the air down a bit more. Give the collapse a little bit of reverb. Alright, so outside of the reverb, a little bit of side chaining action, I think we pretty much have the first mixing pass done. So in the next video, we're going to start laying out the track. We've kind of preemptively done that as it is. But we're going to go ahead and get a basic structure for the whole track. That way, once we know, okay, this is where the break is, this is where the drop is, we can start filling in the sections with other elements.